Hello again, Roy.RealEstate here with you today at Coldwell Banker Legacy in San Angelo. Today I want to talk a little bit about appraisals. Now I did a previous video on appraisal and kind of some of the purposes, but I want to kind of take a different look at it today. So the basic purpose of appraiser is that the lender is going to put out 95, 97, 100% of the value of the property. They're going to loan that much money to someone. So in an effort to protect themselves, they are going to go out and send this independent third-party appraiser out there, and they're going to do an appraisal to determine the value of the house compared to other houses that have sold. Now, when they're looking at houses that have sold, they're trying to, as recent as possible and as close to the same as possible, as comparable as possible. So that's their goals. They like 3 months, they'll go 6 months, and sometimes, depending on where you are, they have to go out a little farther. So what they're basically trying to do is to demonstrate to the lender that the house is worth the value. So first, it's apples to apples comparison, right? So I've got a Honeycrisp apple here and a Gala apple here. So you could sit down and mathematically come up with formulas of ways to compare a Honeycrisp and a Gala apple and taste this particular apple and this particular apple. You know, how sweet are they, how big are they, what are the vitamin contents and all that. So that's more or less what an appraisal is on a house and a piece of property. So at that point, it's not very difficult. These are houses like if you're talking maybe Paul Ann, you know, they're 3 blocks apart, so they're several years difference, but yet they're similar floor plans, same builder, you know, similar amenities other than just a little bit of wear and tear and some other smaller things. So those are fairly easy to do. The next step coming to that, though, it's okay, now you're going to compare this Honeycrisp to a Red Delicious. And so the houses are just a little farther apart. They're a little bit farther apart in age. They're a little bit farther apart in square footage, amenities, those kind of things. And that gets a little more complicated, but it's still doable. They make adjustments to each house. Okay, well, this one's older, so that's an X number of dollars, $3,000 adjustment because it's 4 years older. You know, I mean, literally, it's all math when you look at it. They're trying to look at it and take these other houses that have sold, and even they look a little bit at ones that are on the market and make that comparison. So, you know, that's doable. When you're at that level, it's not bad at all. It takes some work on the appraiser's part, but it works pretty well. But what about if you're trying to compare that Honeycrisp to a Granny Smith? Okay, well, sweetness is not going to be a very good way to compare these because the Granny Smith is tart and a Honeycrisp is sweet. Honey, right, sweet? So then the appraiser has to start working a little harder. They have to start searching. They widen their search for comparable houses. They widen it by date. They widen it by square footage. They widen it by neighborhoods. And then they have to make larger and larger adjustments as they're getting in there to do that. So, you know, it's getting there, but it's harder. It gets more and more complex as they go through each step of the process. But what about when you get out to the next level and you're comparing that Honeycrisp to a pear? Well, how are you going to compare a pear? Okay, well, they just, again, they keep widening. And this is like, okay, well, you've got a property in Mertzen, say, or Miles or Ballinger, where there's just not a lot of properties moving. So they can compare it to a house in San Angelo, but that's not a real direct comparison. They have to make some adjustments there. The adjustments get bigger and bigger as you go out. And when they get bigger and bigger, quite frankly, they're less accurate. There's no way to do it. So you keep going. It's, you know, back to the ultimate comparison, right? Comparing apples to oranges. So it gets very difficult. And again, this is we're trying to mathematically change this orange into this apple so that we can compare them. And that gets very difficult. And then sometimes you just get out to the crazy level of a dragon fruit and an orange. Well, how are you going to compare them? I mean, you can't. There's no way to compare them. So, you know, at this point, the appraisal almost comes down to the appraiser breaking down this house into its independent sections, and land, amenities, square footage, all those, and making large adjustments in some of those areas to try to come up with a dollar amount. And by the way, when they turn in this appraisal to the lender, it's to a dollar. Now, they generally round off the last 3 zeros. You know, they're not going to say it's $175,212, but they will say it's $175,000. And you know, the appraiser does have the contract that the 2 parties agreed to. So they know what the contract price is, and usually they're making a reasonable effort to say, okay, is this house legitimately worth this? Because again, they work for the lender and they're trying to protect that lender. So it gets to be a pain, honestly, but it's one of those, it's not really anybody's fault. There's a simple way to avoid appraisals, right? It's called the Dave Ramsey 100% down rule. If you do that, then you don't have to worry about the appraiser. You get to decide the house you're buying is worth what you're buying it for. For the vast majority that are going to borrow at least some of the money, then the appraisal becomes a big issue. And so it can be a frustrating experience because the buyer and seller have been through, they've negotiated a price that they're both happy with. And then this independent third-party appraiser has to come in, and they're like the Supreme Court. You know, they pass a ruling that the house is worth this. And interesting, like if it's a VA, that appraisal will stick for any VA purchaser on that house for 6 months. If it's an FHA, the same thing for an FHA purchaser. Now, if it's a conventional, a different lender is probably going to get a different appraisal, and it might not have any bearing. But anyway, the appraisal can be a frustrating part. The appraisers in general are very good. They're trying very hard to do what they're supposed to do to protect the lender, and they have a manual, you know, of rules they have to follow and how they do their appraisals, probably this thick. And they work really hard to do it, but it's just at some point the adjustments are such a big percentage of the value of the house that it's not really more than an educated guess, and it gets frustrating when you know you can't make the deal work at the end, whether you're the buyer, the seller, one of their agents, the lender. It doesn't matter. Everybody's frustrated at that point because so much effort and emotions on the buyer and seller's part have been put into the process, and now we can't go forward because the appraisal didn't come in right. So it's frustrating. I understand, I feel the frustration, but it's one of those, it's a legitimate part of the process. It's important. It does protect the lenders and therefore makes the housing market continue, because if the lenders can't turn around and if they're not sure of the value of the houses, then the whole market falls apart. So it's an important part of the process, but it's frustrating. It's not any fun when one person gets to make a final decision of what the house is worth. And so anyway, just a little bit of explanation of the process, how it works, and what they're literally trying to do. And if you got any questions, give me a call, Roy.RealEstate, 325-268-0775. Thank you.